If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet, we are back. We've got a Special Forces member here with us. He's also an author, Johan Raath. And Johan spoke to us before about his second book, actually, A Breed Apart. He tells me it's going very well. I thank all of you. I thank all of you who's donated to the book, bought the book and supported the man. Please give us feedback. I would love to know how you experienced the book. But he did write another book as well. He wrote one called Blood Money. Now, Blood Money is very interesting because that's his time after Special Forces, and he worked in Iraq in a private capacity as a military contractor for 14 years. From what my friends told me, he did excellently there, did very well. In fact, there are certain things which happened in Iraq where Special Forces took command of a base which the Americans abandoned and they ran away. But I'm not allowed to tell you the story. I'm sorry. The people who involved said to me, Chris, please don't reveal too much. So we're not. But what I'm trying to tell to you is the South Africans made a huge impression. That I really know. And then Johan came back and he wrote a book about it. This book is still available, so we expect you to support it. And now I've said enough. Johan, very welcome here. Thank you for your time. Can you please tell us what's happening with that book and the previous one as well?
Chris, nice to be back with you again. Thank you for the opportunity. So A Breed Apart that just came out is my second book about my Special Forces years and training. But that laid the foundation actually for the first book. And, the first book was about my time as a private military contractor, which is the nice descriptive word these days for guys that does this kind of work. And I'll explain to you now actually the difference between that and the mercenary. There is a definition between it. But that was my first book. And nobody's ever written an in-depth book about private military contracting, especially after 9/11, when the market opened up really big and a lot of guys went to Iraq and Afghanistan, and later on to other places like Libya and Somalia and so on and so forth. But the thing that set it off was 9/11. And I always say in my presentations when I do book talks about blood money that, right, wrong, or indifferent, the Americans had to do something after 9/11. I mean, you can't be a superpower and you take such a bloody nose and you just let it go by. So I'm not here to judge their decisions, if it was right or wrong. What I can tell you is they had to do something, and they first went into Afghanistan looking for Al-Qaeda and the leadership. And then they acted on Iraq on information that they believed was true. We found out the story of, what it was afterwards. And I can elaborate a bit on it in a bit if you want me to. But Afghanistan had to be invaded. And it is well known that Al-Qaeda had terrorist cells there. And it was found that bin Laden was there and his lieutenants. It took them a while, took them 10 years, but they eventually got bin Laden. And they overthrew the Taliban, which was in power for 5 years prior to 2001. And it was a brutal regime, as we all know. So I'm not going to say it was right, but they did what they believed was right. In Iraq, they acted on information that there was weapons of mass destruction. This information, I later learned, came from sources within Iran that was against Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was a Sunni, which is the majority Muslims in Iraq. The majority is Shiites, and their power base is Iran. So a lot of them that was in political opposition to Saddam was in exile in Iran, and they actually spread rumors that there is weapons of mass destruction, which the politicians in America chose to buy. The intelligence services were skeptical. I can tell you that. They were very skeptical. But the politicians chose to buy it, and they acted on it. I think it would have gone down better if they said there was weapons of, chemical weapons and bio weapons of different kind that can also be used for mass destruction. It is a well-known story that Saddam Hussein killed many of his own opposition forces, especially Kurds in the 80s with chemical warfare, sarin gas, mustard gas, and the same with the Iraq-Iran war. So they had big stockpiles of chemical weapons. And I guess if they changed the word weapons of mass destruction to chemical weapons, it would have gone down better. There was also another reason why I think they could have warranted to invade Iraq, and that is that the grandfather of ISIS, Musaba al-Zarqawi, was already known as an extreme militant. He was a Jordanian-born militant that also did his training in Afghanistan in the 80s, where they all started off, and he met the young bin Laden there, and they had some interaction. But he was very opposed to the Americans coming into Iraq, and he formed terrorist cells, and he was in hiding in northeastern Iraq, in Kurdistan. And I think if they used that and the chemical weapons as a reason to go, because he had similar aspirations as bin Laden to attack America and to do, a mass attack, as they call it, or there's a word for it, but yeah, a mass casualty attack. And that was his dream, was to attack America in a similar vein. So if they used the reason for invading Iraq as chemical weapons, which there was, and this militant, I think it would have gone down better. But anyway, the mainstream media chose to hammer the weapons of mass destruction story, which the politicians fell for. Right, wrong, or indifferent, the war kicked off, and then it intensified. The offensive war was over within a month. Of course, conventionally, nobody can fight America. But unconventionally, then a lot of the old Saddam officers and intel people went underground, and they started forming terrorist cells, and they started the guerrilla phase and the insurgency phase of the Iraq war. And that's where the Americans actually lost more people over a period of time than in the conventional war. So these attacks, I think, intensified, and eventually, they had two fronts where they had to fight. They had hundreds of thousands of people deployed in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And to free up combat soldiers, they started looking towards privateers to assist them. For an American combat soldier to stand guard at the airport, or to look after a power station, or to escort convoys was actually a waste. They had to go to the front where the insurgents were and where the fighting and the action was. So to free up American soldiers, they got in private contractors from all over the world. Of course, you'll start, when you do this kind of work, you'll try and find the best you can. So you look for special forces guys. There's only so many of them. Then you go to normal military guys that served in the infantry and so on. And later on, they just ran out of enough guys. Then lesser qualified people made it there. Right, wrong, or indifferent. Some survived, some got killed, some got injured. So that is how it opened up for us to get there. Now, the definition of a mercenary by the UN law is a person that fights on behalf of another group or government and active war, that participate in combat battle. And that is a fine line. So we didn't go to Iraq to engage in combat. We were not contracted by the American government through private companies to go and fight. We were contracted to take care of places, to take care of generals, of very important persons, of power stations, airports, convoys, so on and so forth. However, the enemy saw us the same as the US soldiers. They saw us as their main arch enemy, an infidel that doesn't belong there. So they attacked us all the same. We got also roadside bombed, we got mortared and rocketed, we got ambushed, we got suicide bombed. So, and that led to the title of my book. So I knew when I wrote a book about private military contracting, and if I call it blood money, people are going to think, these bloodthirsty killers went there to kill people for a living. But it's not true. What happened is 40 South Africans were killed from January 2004 until December 2011, when the Americans left. Private military contractors, and double that amount got seriously wounded. Many of us ended up on surgery and operating tables, either in the Middle East or in South Africa, because of injuries sustained there. So I chose to call the book Blood Money because we earned our money through bleeding. A lot of guys bled for their wage. So that was the title of the book. I started making notes, here in the mid the second decade of the new millennium, 2015 roundabout, I started making notes of my time in Iraq, because I knew, it would come to an end. My body was getting tired from injuries, and I had to attend to myself, and I've been away from home for, close to 20 years, because before Iraq, I've done other contracting work all over. So I started making notes, just for the family and for the generations to follow, to know what we did. Because the conversation was always, what do you do? I work in Iraq or Afghanistan. Then they say, what do you do? We do security. And then the conversation's over. So a lot of my friends encouraged me to turn these memoirs into a book. And then, when people ask them what we do, they can say, go and buy the book and read the whole story. And that's what I did. So I explained from A to Z how we lived, what we did, what kind of missions we did, how we got attacked. There's a lot of humor in the book, where there's ex-soldiers and policemen and law enforcement people. There's always funny stories as well, but there's also tragedy, a lot of bloodshed, terrorism. I talk about all the terror groups in the Middle East at the time, which is still prevalent. Later on, I talk about the birth of ISIS, that, had a long history. I talk about, the fight within Islam between the different religious groupings. So I tackle a lot of different subjects. So it's a book filled with drama, action, war, terrorism, heartache, laughter, history. And people like that. They learned a lot. It opened up their eyes to what we do and how we did it. And that's how Blood Money came about. So, the cover of the book has got an interesting story where I sit in front of a Black Hawk helicopter. A lot of people said to me, was that a posed photo? And it was actually not. What happened is I was in the northwest of Iraq in a very hot area called just next to Tel Afar. It was west of Mosul. We called it the Badlands because that's where Al-Qaeda hung out. And this is to this day where between Raqqa and Mosul this is the area where most of the hardcore insurgents of ISIS and Al-Qaeda still hangs out. So it was a dangerous area. And we couldn't move on the road. The convoys were getting shot up. And I had to go to Mosul. I was promoted to manager of a security project there. And I had to go to Mosul to get some American military ID cards for my men. And I got permission to fly with the US guys on the helicopters. And so I jumped on the Black Hawk, which I loved. I love helicopters. As guys from Special Forces, we like helicopters. We work with them a lot. So I jumped on a helicopter and we flew a short hop from where I was to Tel Afar, which is an insurgency hotbed, and there was fighting going on at the time. And we landed on a little airfield there that was an old fort, no, not a fort, the old jail. And the building behind me on the real photo is actually a temporary forward operating base, what the Americans call a FOB, but we call it a tactical HQ. So we landed there because we had to pick up some American soldiers. And as we landed, there was fighting going on around the airfield. I think it was the first Cav, American first Cav, or some cavalry unit that was fighting in the area. And I know there were Special Forces guys deployed, and there was heavy fighting going on. So we couldn't take off. There was shots fired, mortars in the air, rockets, all sorts of things. So we sat there on the helipad, and there was one American soldier with me, that unknown soldier, I didn't know his name. And on the photo, the two of us sit next to each other. And I'll send you the photo because it's not really displayed in the front of the book, but I'll send you the original photo. So the two of us had talking, and the crew and some of the pilots were so tired because they were flying day and night, casualties, bringing ammo, ferrying troops. Those guys really worked hard. Some of them were so tired they just slept there on the concrete on the ground. But I sat there with my AK in my arms, and this soldier sit next to me with his M16 rifle. That we thought maybe we should be ready because there was just a berm. A berm is like a triangular sand wall that you make with a bulldozer to defend you against incoming. And there was just a berm with some razor wire around it, around this little landing strip for the helicopter. So we thought, no, we need to be ready. If the insurgents come over these berm walls, we're going to have to shoot them. So we sat there and we watched the story and we heard how they were fighting, and it was quite a fierce fight. There was a lot of booms and bangs and rounds flying around. Then one of the chopper pilots came to me, because now this was the first time, it was in 2004, it was the first time they ferry somebody that's flying unconventional clothes, an AK-47 in their hands, and I looked completely different than the soldiers that he's used to. So the first thing he asked me was, are you CIA? Are you CIA? I said, no, I'm not CIA. I'm South African, I'm so-and-so. And then he asked me what we do here, and I explained to them we're here in support of them. And, we were doing the base perimeter security on the base next door where we flew from. And I explained to him what our role and function was. And then he was very happy. He said to me, can I take a photo? Because he wanted to show his buddies back home, I guess, this guy of AK-47 that's been flown around, because to them it was the enemy. So I said, no, sure. And remember, early 2000s, digital cameras just came out. I had a 1 megapixel camera that I took to Iraq that got shot to pieces in an ambush just a couple of months before. Still got the camera here full of bullet holes. But he had a camera. The phones didn't have cameras in those days, remember. And there wasn't social media. There was Hotmail, and there was Messenger, Yahoo Messenger, that we contacted each other on, and email. So Skype came a little bit later, and then Facebook and all that. But so he took it with a photo, with a camera. And I said to him, well, I would like to have a photo. And he said, okay, in 2 weeks' time, I'm on duty again. When I come to your base, I'll walk to your duty room. I'll bring my camera. You take the chip out. You put it in your computer and you take the photo. And I thought, no, I'll never see this guy again. But lo and behold, 2 weeks later, he landed there on our base and he looked me up and he came with his camera. We took the chip out and I got my photo. And that was the photo, the cover for my book. Just a little interesting story here. You'll see on the cover of the book, but also the original photo that I sent you, there's a very interesting story. So after the photo, he came to me and he said, what kind of music do you like? I said, I like, hard rock and heavy metal. He said, do you like AC/DC? I said, yes, I like AC/DC. I love it. He walked to the chopper, fiddled there under his seat, pilot seat, and he produces a little boombox, a little sound box. And he put it in the gunner's door. And he slaps a CD in there and he pressed play. And lo and behold, Thunderstruck, one of my favorite songs, started playing. And I thought, yeah, this is the best day of my life. Here I'm sitting, flying with the Americans in a Black Hawk helicopter, making new friends. There's war going on around us and I'm listening AC/DC. This was wonderful. And by the way, talk about it. It's a weird thing. I actually was late for your show. I had to do a couple of other things. And I just put a t-shirt on this morning, but I don't know if you can see what it said. Anyway, so I was very impressed with this particular episode. It stuck in my head forever, and I'm glad that became the cover of my book. And it was a good day. So eventually we could take off and we flew. We took some incoming fire, but that was from small arms. The belly of the Black Hawk is hardened to take small arms fire. But in this process, there was a little smoke coming from inside the cabin from where the motor was above our heads. So I don't know what happened. And we flew hard and fast and low to Mosul. And when we landed there, we had to debus and we had to, move quickly because there was smoke and everybody was worried that the thing can go up in flames. But yeah, that was the story of the cover photo and Blood Money.
It is fascinating to talk to people like you. But I have to ask you a question which might be a bit conspiratorial, but people ask me all the time as if I should know. But was Bin Laden really killed?
Well, I can't, I wasn't there. I wasn't part of the team. I've heard team members on the SEAL team describing the story. And it sounds, if you look into the operation as a Special Forces operator, it sounds like the real deal. I'm convinced that he was, because if he wasn't, we would have known about it. They will not keep such a big figurehead and hero quiet if he was still alive. I doubt it. There's conspiracies, and maybe one should question everything in life. You can't just accept things bluntly. But from my point of view and from what I've seen and heard and, the debriefs I've seen and listened to, I think he was killed.
May I ask you, Johan, how do you feel about people pretending to be special forces? Because I know when this recruitment drive started, every second guy. I know about people, and I don't have it against the unit, but they said they were from one STB. SSB, and the word special is of course inside it, and then they try to bullshit poor Americans and British that they're actually a special forces unit, which nobody knows about. How do you people feel about such things?
Look, I think a lot of guys, mostly intentionally, but I think unintentionally, some people do think they're part of a special forces group. You see, in America, special forces is the Green Berets. Special operations forces is guys like, you know, the Deltas and the SEALs and the Tier 1 teams. They've got different designations. It's actually confusing at the best of times. So if you look at units in South Africa, like 3-2 Battalion or the Parachute Battalion or anything that said special, even the Special Police Task Force, of course, you would think you are special, and they are. But they're not Dinkum Special Forces. They are Special Operations Forces, maybe. You know, in South Africa, we never gave them a designation or a specific group. But if you talk about Special Forces and you talk about South Africa, you had to be a recce. You had to undergo the training and the selection and the whole year that I explained now in my new book, Breathe Apart. If you haven't done that, then you can't claim to be Special Forces. You can claim to be part of a special force, but you can't say you're Special Forces. And unfortunately, that's led to a lot of problems. You know, if guys did it unintentionally, it's okay. But, you know, mostly it was done intentionally to fool people on paper to try and get jobs. And that to us, you know, as I said in my first program with you, we call it stolen valor, because that's what they do. They steal our valor. It's very difficult to become a Special Forces member, especially in South Africa, and especially in the time and era that we were there. And for people to use it lightly in conversation is an insult to us. But yeah, so, you know, in the old days, we had different ways of dealing with them, which might be considered barbaric in these days. But now we name and shame them. We put them on a wall of shame for the whole world to see. And there's a website listing them. And people can go and have a look. And these days, in the era of instant communication, it's not so easy to lie and get away with it anymore, because people get hold of people like us and they ask us. And we know, you know. And if we don't know, we ask our HQ, or we ask our superiors that's got the lists of the operators that's gone through the ranks, and we have a quick look, and we catch you out, and we list you as a, you know, as a guy that talks BS, and he must go to the wall of shame. But yeah, it is unfortunate. There is always people that aspire. I think movies has got a lot to do with it. I think TV games, computer games has got a lot to do with it. You know, the word Special Forces is actually it's two very serious words. And that's how I opened the first chapter of my book, my new book. It's not just words. It's special. It is different. It's completely different. And to qualify for it, you have to walk a walk, and you have to go through hard processes. So yeah, hopefully, you know, with my new book that came out, people will see exactly what it takes to become a Special Forces soldier. But today we're talking about private military contracting, and a lot of course, you know, this is what we've done for a living. We were not national servicemen that just went and did our duty 2 years or 1 year or whatever. We joined. We wanted to become professional soldiers. When the war was over in Angola and things changed politically in Africa, you know, a lot of guys left and they went, and a lot got retrenched, and a lot got replaced, and a lot had to go different ways. And so what do? You know, if you're a journalist before and you lose your job, you're going to go and look for another journalistic job. If you were a soldier before, you're going to look for another soldier's job. But Special Forces fortunately prepared us to become private military contractors in a higher grade than normal. And we could go and do protection tasks. We could go and do training tasks. We can go and do mentoring tasks, mentor militaries and governments and assist them with the planning of operations. You can't actively fight with them, but you can mentor them. So it prepared us, and naturally we moved on. And I can say to you that the Iraq and Afghanistan war came at the right time for South Africans from the military and police background from, you know, the previous regime, because a lot of them just lost their work because of a change that had to come. And a lot of them used a little bit of money they got paid out to start small enterprises, which didn't work out. And by the end of the last millennium, a lot of these guys were really battling financially. And then in the new millennium, after 9/11, jobs opened up, the pay was good, it's dollar earns money that you earn. And for South Africans, it really set them sailing. Unfortunately, the market has contracted a lot now. The jobs are less, and there's now, of course, after these wars, there's now many experts, because a lot of them sneaked in. They were never really, belonged there in the first place, but they learned and they saw, and they can talk the talk, and they can put on their CVs. I worked in Iraq for 5-10 years. I worked in Afghanistan, and civilians that are looking for people see it. So unfortunately, it spoiled the market a lot for the guys, the true guys that's done it before Iraq and Afghanistan, and that's really well qualified to do it. But that's the way it goes. You know, it's one of those things that you can't prevent.
Have you ever felt the need to intervene? And I'm asking this because I read it actually, a special air service British warrant officer. He became also involved, I believe, in one of his countries, and he was protecting somebody. And then he felt that the troops surrounding them were not up to scratch, that they had a young lieutenant, and he felt as a senior warrant officer, he had to give this guy fatherly advice. And it came over very well. The lieutenant was man enough to say, thank you, sir. Have you ever felt that need with your vast experience to say to the local troops, guys, let's just get professional or something like that?
Yes, I'm a trainer by nature. That's my first love. I'm come from a long line of a family of teachers. I ended up in Special Forces in the training wing for my last 3 years of my service, and I enjoy instruction. I enjoy teaching people combat tactics, and so yes, I did it. In Iraq a lot, you know, with the Kurds in the north, with the Shiites in the south, with the mixed guys in Baghdad. I always had training sessions. I can send you some photos of it. I've always trained the locals. I've always interacted with the local military. I made friends with the colonels and the generals and with the troops. You know, I had a philosophy that you have to talk to everybody in a foreign country, from the cook to the general, to the sheikh, to the minister, to the driver, to get a feeling of how do they feel? How do they feel about war? How do they feel about you being there? What do they need? What do they lack? And after a while, you can see, and you can start drafting training programs for them. You can give them advice. And I've done it to great effect in Iraq for both soldiers and private guards that we had to use, because there eventually wasn't enough foreigners to stand guard, you know, at the boom gate or at the perimeters. In the beginning, we did it, and we got paid very handsomely for it. But eventually, you know, we had to involve the locals. You have to create jobs, and you have to get them involved. Otherwise, they turn against you and they bomb you and they mortar you. So it was a hearts and mind campaign, and I did a lot of training and consultation. I loved it. For me, it's something that's close to my heart, and I think I've done well. I think I've helped a lot of them on the right path to be more aware of what insurgencies are all about, counterterrorism, you know, to protect themselves, to shoot a little bit better. I was forever training. When I wasn't working, I was training. I did that. I've got a firm belief in train hard and fight even harder, and I passed it on to the locals as well.
But it's sadly also so that there's no such thing as a parade for the returning private military contractors. It's not like the troops coming back and they have this, you know, flowers being thrown upon them with the women's fight, all those things. How do you people feel about that?
No, you can't complain because you get paid well for it. There is no honor in it. You know, in Iraq, this is rough figures, but in the years of the active insurgency after the war, until the Americans left, roughly 500 private contractors were killed from all over the world. That's just security. And then there were drivers and, you know, logisticians, and there were all sorts of people that did jobs, cleaners, because there was just not enough labor available. And of them, a lot got killed. All in all, 1,500 private contractors or contractors were killed in that period of, I say, the old Iraq, from, say, 2003, around about June, July, until December 2011, when the Americans withdrew. And that's a lot of people. And it was an unthankful job. Nobody ever, you know, the funniest thing for me was I had to fly. I spoke about this episode for the photo of the cover of my book, where I had to go and get US military ID cards for my men to be able to move on the helicopters, to be able to eat in their mess halls, to be able to get some of their medical assistance if we get shot or whatever, because we were working on US government contracts. I had to go to England in 2007 because then the cards were not issued anymore. in Iraq, you had to go to a US military or Air Force or whatever facility. So I flew to England and I went to a Air Force base outside of London. And it was all pre-arranged, and I went to get this military ID card because I needed it for, I was then in a top managing position, so I had to be able to liaise with the US military a lot, in the green zone especially. So I flew to England, and I went to this base, I took a taxi, cost £100 those years to go to this base and back. But when I got there, eventually I was received by a staff sergeant and in a US military, and he did the photo and he made the card for me. When I left, he said to me, "I just want to thank you." And I said, "Whatever for?" He said, "Thank you for assisting our country and our government and our people. We know what you do over there." And I was flabbergasted that a US service member could thank me, because we've got a thankless job. I mean, we get paid good money. You keep your mouth shut, you carry on. If you get shot, you get shot. You get good dollars. You get paid good dollars to do what you do, and you can't complain. But this guy thanked me, and I was really deeply touched by it. And I said to him, "Well, thank you guys for giving us the opportunity to work with you and for you and to assist you." And we struck up a friendship that lasted a long time. But yeah, to come back to your original question, there's no glory and there's no honor in this job. And there's not many people that talk about it, because you might be prosecuted, It's a thin line. Just now, the government come knock on your door and they say, "Hey, you were busy with private military contracting activities that's against the law." And there's a law in our country. It's called the PMC Act of, I think, 98, that says you are not allowed to partake in wars on foreign soil with foreign countries or with foreign groups or with the terror groups, whatever the case might be. So you have to be careful. I always say to the guys, if you enter this game, be sure what you know what you enter yourself into, because it can very well be, you can get asked to do things that's borderline illegal by your own country and by the UN, which is unfortunate, because there's a lot of military, private military guys out there that's been in special forces, in special operations groups, that's got vast experience. You can't all stay in the military forever. And I think that the private military circles is more powerful, I think, than the current militaries of the world combined, because there's so many of us with so much knowledge. And it's a shame that we can't go and help in active combat situations, legally, go and help people, because we've got the knowledge. But yeah, for some people, you're never on the right side, It's like the Ukraine and Russia now. Some people's on this side, some people's on that side. What side do you choose? If you work for one lot, then the other lot accuses you of being your favoritism to that, or the other way around. So yeah, it's a dog-eat-dog business. This much I can tell you. Private military contracting, there's always somebody vying to take your spot. There's always somebody trying to work you out. You have to watch your back all the time. But it's also a rewarding kind of business. If you find the right combination and the right team, you have to choose your teams well. You have to choose your co-workers well. And yeah, it's rewarding, but it is challenging also.
Do you think it was a religious war?
Yeah, it was eventually. It didn't start that way in Iraq or Afghanistan, but then this troublemaker that I spoke about, Mzaba al-Zarqawi, he turned it into a religious war in 2005 when he started attacking. He was a Sunni Muslim, and he started attacking Shia Muslim mosques. There was an incident on the 23rd of February 2005 where he bombed a very holy mosque in Samarra, north of Baghdad. And that the mosques are, you're not supposed to touch the mosques. That's one area you're not supposed to go and cause trouble. So he bombed their mosque, and that set them off, and that really got the Shia, and especially the militias. The militias are back out of Iran, great backing out of Iran, and they are very militant as well. So they're another form of, certain of them are another form of terror, because they terrorize. They went after Americans, and they terrorized the population, and they went after private military contractors. So you had insurgency groups, and you had terror groups that they call terror groups. Then you had militia groups that also terrorized and killed people. But that particular incident, and his aim was to set the Muslim branches of Sunni and Shia against each other. He wanted a war, because in the militant Islamist jihadi mindset. Anybody that is not conforming to their way of living or religion is kind of an infidel, or is a, you don't belong there and you need to be wiped off. And even their own, even though they've got the same Quran, they've got the same Bible, the same religious book and the same religion, namely Islam, certain of them see one branch of that particular religion as not the right branch. And there's a history about it, and I wrote about it at the end of my book. I explained the history of why they are so, for a long time, and even to this day, there's a lot of animosity between the groups within Islam. But yeah, it was eventually religious. It was a war between Sunni and Shia, and it was set off by Musawa al-Zarqawi. He was killed a year later in 2006 by the Americans north of Baghdad. At the time, there was also a $25 million bounty on his head, the same as it was with bin Laden. Now, interestingly, he caused enough trouble after the 2003 invasion, like they say, or the war with America. He had aspirations of representing Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And eventually he caused enough trouble for bin Laden to say to him, he can operate as Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They were known as AQI, Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They caused a lot of atrocities and murders and attacks and stuff. But after 2005, after this particular attack on the mosque, and after a few other brutal attacks against fellow Muslims, bin Laden actually banished him from Al-Qaeda. And he said to him, well, it's okay to attack foreigners and Americans and infidels, but our own people, not so kosher. And he was banished. And then he got really militant, and he formed a group called ISI. It was the Islamic State in Iraq. We're talking about late 2005, early 2006. And he said, screw it, I'm going to do my own thing. And that mindset, and his lieutenants, okay, he was killed shortly after that, 6-7 months after that. But the ideology lived on for a very brutal and a very militant group that, he was too brutal for Al-Qaeda. I mean, if you get banished out of an organization like Al-Qaeda, then you really have to be a bad guy. So he was killed, but his lieutenants went underground and they went to Syria and they regrouped there and they waited until the Americans left. And then they came to the fore 2012, 2013. Of course, we know what happened the 10th of June, 2014. I was in Iraq when they invaded Mosul and announced themselves to the world as ISIS. So all that happened is ISI already existed. It was formed by Musawa al-Zarqawi many years before the Islamic State in Iraq. And when they came out of Syria, they just added the S for Syria and it became ISIS. So their tactics and their brutality wasn't new to us. That was there in the beginning, in the old days of Iraq. The world was shocked. But also one of the problems was now in the new decade of the new millennium, or the second decade of the new millennium, social media has taken over, and they've used it very effectively to market themselves, where in 10 years before, they couldn't really. They put internet videos up, which was taken down, of beheadings and of attacks and stuff. But now they had a new platform. They had Facebook, Twitter, they had Instagram, they had all these things to quickly market themselves, and they did it very effectively. But long story short, it was incepted many, many years ago by this troublemaker. And he wanted to start a religious war between the groupings.
Johan, I have to ask you, how well rated is the South Africans in this theater?
Course, very well. The private military contracting circles welcome the South Africans. And I think it's got a lot to do with executive outcomes that laid the foundation in the 90s. They did sterling work in Angola, Sierra Leone, and a few other places, mostly ex-South African special forces or people from special units. And that carried over into the new millennium. And, the thing about the South Africans is they don't care, they just carry on. They don't worry if the aircon's broken. They don't worry if things are not going their way. They're not very fussy. They make a plan, they improvise, they work around it. And they just keep going, and clients like that. They like people that it is rugged and that can improvise and can just not complain all the time about this and that and next. So we are more unconventional, I think, And make no mistake, there's great private military contractors from all over. I mean, I've got many ex-US servicemen, French, ex-British, even from different nations. As far as Fiji, I've got great friends that we've made in private military contracting circles, Australians, New Zealanders. But in general, I would say we are very highly rated and sought after, especially when there's a hard job to be done. They go to the South Africans first. We talk about a kosher contract and a hard contract. If there's a kosher contract, then, the foreigners will swamp it. But if there's a really hard contract that there's a bit of challenges and uneasy living conditions and the food's not good, then the South Africans, they'll bring them. Because right, wrong, or indifferent, we accept it. Actually, maybe it's not so smart to do it because we shoot ourselves in the foot. People hire us for the hard jobs and when things are not so lacquer. But at the end of the day, it gave us a good name and it put us in a different class. And I think we are very well rated overseas. The guys have accounted themselves very well. Of course, you get the ones that hit your name with a plank now and again, but I think in our case, it's very little and rare. So yeah, the guys has done well, and I applaud all of them. But I also applaud all of my private military contracting friends from America and Britain. There's really good privateers out there, and there's professional guys out there. And I miss it. I miss it, to be honest with you. I miss this work, but you couldn't do it forever. The body was getting tired. And maybe a little bit. They say we never fully retire. We always have one more battle or one more job left. So we'll see.
We spoke about the private military contractors. We spoke about the official forces for US. What about the local Iraqi troops?
Interesting question. Initially, when you ask any private military contractor this question, he's going to shake his head and he's going to give you stories of battle, of struggle, of getting them to cooperate. But let me tell you this, we couldn't do our work without them. You can't be in a foreign country without engaging the local nationals. You can't. You need them. You need their language skills. You need their appearance. You need their translation skills. And you need them to do tasks that you're not getting paid for, like washing floors and windows and driving vehicles with their country's rules and regulations, which there's not much of. But still, you need them. And eventually we had to start using locals. We screened them. Language was a big problem. Especially in the outlying areas, Baghdad and in the north, they can speak a little bit of English. Of course, now after the war in the last 2 decades, they've been taught to speak English. But initially it was a struggle, and a lot of South Africans learned quite a bit of Arabic, and a lot of Arabs learned a lot of Afrikaans commands. One thing I can say about Afrikaans is there's not many people in the world that can understand it. It's really a small percentage. I worked it out one day, something like 0.05% of the global population that can understand it. So we are referred to as, what's that, ghost whisperers? There was a movie about it, wind talkers. We are referred to as wind talkers. So a lot of Iraqis learned commands in Afrikaans. And sometimes when we had to do movements, where we don't want the insurgents, we know they're listening, then the radios would be brought to South Africans to be spoken in high, pure Afrikaans, so that the enemy can't intercept. There's a way to say things in English. You can refer to a motor vehicle as a car, and in Afrikaans as a car. But you can say in Afrikaans also there's a voertuig. So now the enemy doesn't understand that car, he will understand. But so if you speak a pure form of Afrikaans, it's very difficult for them. And I had this in Sudan as well. When I worked in Sudan with American ex-special forces guys, they often gave the radios to us to interact with each other, to arrange movements especially, so that the enemy can't understand it. But yeah, so back to the Iraqis. We couldn't do our work without them. And I think coming from Africa, and especially the special forces guys, we had to learn to work with local populations. In Africa, we had to learn how to adapt and respect them and, give them their bit of honor, not honor, but respect. You need to respect somebody if you're in his country to a certain extent. Otherwise, he's not going to accept you. And I think we had more experience coming from Africa doing that, working with local populations than people from Europe and a lot of parts in America. And that helped us a lot. And the Iraqis loved us. They often told me, a funny story that I mentioned in my book is, on my first gig, there is, I mentioned there was Americans and Brits and a few South Africans on this gig, and there was a few Iraqis, and the English wasn't all that, the English wasn't great. And a lot of South Africans, especially old ex-servicemen and Afrikaans guys, the English is not all that great either. So one night I was on duty, and one of the Iraqis came to me and he said to me, Mr. We've got a big problem. I said, what is the problem? He said, oh, these Americans and British people, they speak very funny English, but we can understand. And toe lag ek, and I laughed at it, because there's not our first language, but they understand us better because we talk in a primitive manner to them, and the accents of the Americans and the British guys was too much for them to understand. So that was quite funny, and often we interacted with them easier. And that is also, but we made friends with them. I made very good Iraqi friends. I must say they're very hospitable. If you find the right, the true Muslim, he will accept you in his house as a stranger. He will give you food. He'll take care of you. They're really very hospitable people. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed interacting with them, and we couldn't do our work without them. That's a fact.
Well, you opened a can of worms actually now here, because if it is so, and we know it's true, that they are part of a South African population, and I'm not pointing fingers, who's very sympathetic to the jihadi cause. These people can actually speak Afrikaans, and I do know that a few of them actually left for ISIS. And the first thing they did when they arrived, even if they were qualified as a medical doctor or as an engineer, was got into the intelligence services to translate Afrikaans.
I'm with you, but remember now, I'm talking about the early years before ISIS and when things were raw. I'm sure after 2010 now, the last decade, that is the case, no problem. The South Africans that went to join ISIS in their height, which was 2015, 16, 17, there was a lot of them, not a lot, but there were quite a few of them, and some got killed. It was never in the mainstream media, but a lot of them were killed. And how we know it is they found a South African driver's license on one of the South Africans that was fighting with ISIS in Syria. And that's how the whole story came out. So I'm sure, I'm talking about the early 2000s mainly. But yeah, no, 100%. And you are right in your assessment with that.
May I ask you about Afghanistan? Now, I know you were not there with the great collapse. As a professional soldier, what the hell went wrong?
Of course, if you look at both models, Iraq, after the Americans left, yes, ISIS came out and they regrouped, but they were eventually defeated, again with the assistance of the Americans, but not to such a big extent. The Iraqis did a lot of fighting, and of course the Iranians for their own reasons, hidden motives. But in Afghanistan, it's a different story. And South Africans were involved in the training of Iraqis. And let me tell you, there are some Iraqi units that are very well trained from American perspective, and guys from South Africa and New Zealand and all over special forces, guys that trained them. And they actually went on and they were mentored for a period of time with the foreigners that trained them, and they went on missions together. But in Afghanistan, it seems to me, Afghanistan's more primitive. Much of the outlying areas, as far as I understand it, people are not educated. As a matter of fact, I heard that over 90% of the new Afghani army that was recruited before the Americans left, more than 90% were not schooled. They never had any formal schooling, and they couldn't read and write and stuff like that. So I think from that point of view, it was more difficult to train them, one. And two is there wasn't like a handover process. I think there should have been a co-government process for a longer period of time. It's just as if the towel was thrown in. And I can't comment on things that I wasn't directly involved with, but it seems to me that they just decided enough's enough. And I think it goes about politics. It goes about, campaign promises, and it goes about this and that, the next. But who knows? I can't, what I can tell you is it was done in a manner that has left a bitter taste in the military private contracting circles, in military circles, in general, in army, you know, us guys that knows what's going on. It's left a very bitter taste. The Afghani people need all the help they can get, and they were abandoned. The problem is there also, you know, Iraq had a coalition government for a long time, with the Americans, and they were educated people that came out of Iran and Iraq. Saddam Hussein's education system was very good. He made sure that people got educated very well. But in Afghanistan, the Taliban is a different, they're a primitive organization, and they're very militant, and they see things only one way, with a one-sided view. And so the people that got chosen, I think, to co-govern never really got the political backing or the political info that they needed to govern a country. And I think the Americans just helped them to keep it upright, like a deck of cards, you know, a house of cards. They kept it upright, but when they withdrew, the whole deck of cards came down. I think the foundation and the pillars were not there like it was in Iraq. Iraq's got many problems. And I tell you now, they will not have peace for a long time, but at least it is going a little bit better there than Afghanistan. And I think, yeah, it's just the way it was done. You shouldn't just have left. I think it should have been co-governed a bit more, and you should have left a little bit of forces there, and you should have checked the guys that you recruited into the Afghan army out better. You know, at least teach them to write and read and speak English and stuff like that.
Fascinating to me to hear this inside info. I have two last questions for you. I know your time is limited. Blackwater. Blackwater became known as human rights abusers. And we do know there were some shooting incidents where they just started shooting like crazy people. This is proven. But my question to you is, was this the norm? Was this the rule? Or was this totally not the rule and somebody just panicked?
I disagree with the statement that, you know, they were a group that just started shooting and that they committed atrocities. Of course, you know, if you read my book, you will see I've actually addressed that particular point about the Blackwater shooting, the Nassau Square shooting, which occurred at the end of 2007, which made things much more difficult for private military contracting. But if you look at the incident and you speak to the guys that was there and was involved, they were about to be attacked. They were about to get clobbered. And the problem here is the enemy, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, those years, you couldn't see him. He didn't wear a uniform. He wasn't carrying a gun over his shoulder. He was a civilian. He was even women with, you know, their traditional dresses on, packed with explosives underneath, with ball bearings in it for maximum effect for killing. They were children that lobbed grenades at patrols. Everybody could have been your enemy. So it was very hard. And we lost a lot of guys those years. You know, 2006 and 2007 was the height of that war, of the insurgency against the Americans and the private contractors. You'll see it when you read my book. Especially 2006 was an especially bloody year. And so this incident that you referred to, where they shot a lot of civilians, yes, they did, but there were markers, there were indicators of attacks. And of course, the media will turn it around. And unfortunately, you know, if it's in an urban setup, if there's shots fired or there's people fighting, there's always going to be civilians and innocent bystanders that's going to get injured or killed. And it's unfortunate. I don't think it was deliberate. I certainly made sure I studied the reports and I spoke to the guys. I know guys that work with Blackwater. All the South African military contractors know the guys from Blackwater. And I personally think that it was not a malicious intent. Did they shoot too much? Did they shoot too many people? I can't say. I wasn't there. But if your life's in danger on the ground, you do things that afterwards, you know, hindsight's always 20/20, and it's easy to comment from an armchair in a living room, you know, to say that, yeah, you guys were wrong. But if you are there and your life's in danger, it's a different story. Otherwise, you know, I think Blackwater did very good work. They also saved a lot of lives. That much I can tell you. And yes, they were a little cocky and they were a little arrogant, but they, for right reasons, because everybody was testing them. You know, like I said earlier on, private military contractors get tested. It's a dog-eat-dog business. They was the top company at the time, and everybody, you know, was kind of against them and testing them. If you're good at something, you're always going to have critics, and you're always going to have enemies. The same with sportsmen. You know, we know in South Africa, if there's a certain sportsman that inflicts pain on your particular team, you don't like him, but if he plays for the national team, you love him. So read my book, and I think it will answer your question on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, one last question. Do you think there's a chance that this Al-Qaeda, and let's call them Muslim jihadis, are moving into Sub-Saharan Africa?
Yeah, they're here. No, there's no doubt about it. They've moved in here a long time ago. They've been active here since early in the new millennium, especially towards the end of the first decade when we had the Soccer World Cup. They had aspirations of disrupting it. Luckily, it was stopped through proper actions by our forces. But yeah, no, they are here, and they're using Southern Africa and especially South Africa, you know, to great effect, because it's easy to obtain paperwork here. It's easy to obtain passports and ID books and birth certificates. It's easy to, you know, open bank accounts. It's a nice place to come and set up a shop for support of people. So, you know, we don't have terrorist attacks in our country, but we've got a very large problem with support and support bases and helping and assisting. And I hope the authorities are on top of it. We know in Mozambique now we've got that group in the north in Cabo Delgado, which is aligned with ISIS and Al-Shabaab, they say maybe, but they've got supporters in South Africa for sure. We know it for a fact. So I hope our services and government keeps eye on the ball. I don't see any particular physical attacks in the near future, but the problem is this thing is like a weed. It grows in your grass. You have to take it, cut it off as it grows. You can't let it grow because one day it takes over your whole garden. And I don't see these weeds being taken out or taken off. So yeah, let's hope for the best. Hope the security services keep doing their jobs.
Yes. Where can we get hold of this book, Johan? Both of them.
Both my books are internationally available on Amazon. And in America, I think that through Barnes & Noble, you can order them. I also know that there's a book chain in Britain. I must just think of them now. But you can just Google it, or you can go to a bookshop in Europe or Britain or in America, Barnes & Noble or Amazon, and you can order it. And if you have any problems, of course, my email address is open to you. I'll send you advice where you can go and scratch for it. And yeah, Blood Money did very well. I'm grateful. And it was the first time that anybody spoke openly about PMC contracting work in either Iraq or Afghanistan and the things we did, how we lived, how we were attacked and everything else around it. And so, yeah, I hope people will keep reading it. It's educational. There's a lot of information there on the politics of the Middle East, a lot of information on Islam and the problems within the groups of Islam. There's a lot of information on terrorist types of weapons and bombs and what they use to attack people with. Yeah, we saw the sharp end of it. So I wrote about it. People can be aware of it.
Thank you. We appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure, Chris. Nice talking to you. Have a good day.